Putin will die soon. That's a fact, and everything will end, said the Ukrainian head of state. What does this mean? Well, we've already heard many different statements more than once about Putin's health having significantly deteriorated. We know the numerous memes about these stories, his long table, how he was panically afraid of catching COVID-19, and everyone has already mocked those long tables where he held meetings. Now, most often he holds meetings virtually, that is, via video link. The Kremlin has mastered 21st century technologies. But in the meantime, there have been many statements from the Ukrainian main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, as well as from Western publications. Newsweek, Bill Day conducted their own investigations and wrote about various versions and possible diagnoses, either prostate cancer or leukemia, or, well, it seems progressive brain cancer. But I'm not a doctor to make diagnoses, though in order to analyze what might have been happening, this is necessary. The thing is, all the publications that appear in the media are, in one way or another, not based on empty rumors. Obviously, spreading gossip and rumors seems easy, especially when we have the means and tools to do so. The 21st century, the world of social networks and technology, gives us such capabilities. But of course, it's not just about gossip, it's about the fact that one way or another, from time to time, you can hear how much Putin fears for his life, how cautious he is, and that he might really be ill. But at the same time, and this was reported by the reputable publication The Times at one point, the following. This was literally last year. So the Times wrote that Putin wants to live a very long life. He plans to outlive many people because, in fact, he's working on biolaboratories. In other words, he gave the order to build biolaboratories that experiment with biotechnology, with DNA, and essentially work to extend lifespan, to regenerate cells, to live a very long time, well, over 100 years. Kovalchuk was the one who inspired him to do this. This is the same Kovalchuk who is part of Putin's inner circle and who, among other things, was perhaps the only person the Russian dictator spoke with during the COVID-19 pandemic. They talked about many things. They discussed the role of the Russian world, the Russian idea, why Moscow should dominate and be an empire, and the need to constantly expand its own horizons. So essentially, that's what they talked about for a very long time. Well, accordingly, this also had an impact. There was also Ilyin, the Russian fascist, and many other figures whom Kovalchuk quoted, and whom he and Putin read and discussed together. And Kovalchuk, just like Patrushev to some extent, is quite a serious proponent of conspiracy theories, spreading various rumors and nonsense about how the United States, through some biolaboratories, viruses, and other things, is trying to destroy the Russian dictator and, in fact, all of Russia. There, this is popularized, circulated, and such a point of view was popular among them. So this same Kovalchuk inspired Putin with the idea that it was necessary to create a biolab which would in fact set the following tasks for scientists: to develop anti-aging methods, including research into advanced technologies such as 3D bioprinting, as well as the use of blood from severed deer antlers. This is probably an obsession of, in fact, Putin's associate Kovalchuk, who also claims that the United States is developing corresponding biological weapons so that Putin lives as little as possible. Well, that's basically what he's working on. In other words, Putin is very seriously afraid for his life. And he truly wants to live a very long time and essentially remain a dictator to continue the war. Meanwhile, what the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, said is truly shocking because Putin will die soon. And a scientific analysis can be drawn based on this. So, as not to get lost in speculation, not to wonder what diagnosis Putin has, or to establish his medical history, we can turn to history and see that the only one among Soviet dictators who lived to an old age was Mikhail Gorbachev. He lived to be 91 years old. The rest, the average age at death was 65, 72, 73 years among Soviet leaders. They died from various causes. The only one who died earlier was Vladimir Lenin at 53 years old. He died Joseph Stalin died. Well, according to different sources, he was either already 75 or only 74. The official version is that he died of a stroke. Next, Nikita Khrushchev died at 77. He died from his third heart attack, which led to irreversible factors that affected his health and resulted in his death. Leonid Brezhnev died at 75. The official cause was sudden cardiac arrest due to numerous heart conditions. Yuri Andropov died at 69. Konstantin Chernenko's death occurred at 73, liver and cardiopulmonary failure. The only one is Mikhail Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, president of Russia, Putin's predecessor, who actually brought the current Russian dictator to power. Yeltsin died at 76. There you have it, the age at which they died. The only one who lived on was Gorbachev. Well, of course, considering that Putin tries to drink deer blood and bathe in tubs and drink some kind of tea with Shoigu in Altai or wherever they went on vacation and, made propaganda videos out of it. Well, actually, he probably wants to live at least twice as long as Gorbachev. But here are the facts. Here are the statistics on the deaths of Soviet leaders. Putin is now reaching exactly that age. And he finds that the trend historically was that Soviet leaders either died from cardiovascular diseases such as heart attacks or strokes, or from complications arising from various chronic illnesses. Those, in fact, were the main causes of death. Well, actually, let's say the reactions were different. But the most important thing is to understand what happens next. When Putin dies, in the Soviet Union, this meant a very serious struggle for power. It was secret. Of course, it was not on the front pages of Soviet newspapers, and no one could write about it. But as we now know from history, from numerous facts, this struggle was desperate, sometimes with a completely unpredictable outcome. And who will emerge victorious in this race and take essentially the throne of power, essentially continue to rule the country? In this case, we also have a lot of questions because much has been written, said, and filmed about Putin's successor, about who this might be, how he might govern, and whether he will follow the dictatorship. Obviously, he probably will follow it. Could it be someone else? In other words, there are many assertions, hypotheses, and assumptions they exist. But one thing is clear, certain changes have taken place. They did not happen only during the era of stagnation, when Brezhnev, Andropov, and Chernenko succeeded one another. But eventually changes began to happen after them because neither Andropov nor Chernenko managed to stay in their positions for very long. After all, they were replaced, just as the policy of the Soviet Union ultimately changed as well. By the way, the one who changed it to the so-called perestroika and ultimately contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union was Mikhail Gorbachev, who lived to be 91 years old. And those who tried to centralize power, establish dictatorships, totalitarian regimes, authoritarianists, they died much earlier. These are facts, this is statistics, and this is mathematics. Accordingly, what will happen here after Putin's death? After Putin's death, a serious struggle for power is also expected. It is important to understand that obviously the clans surrounding Putin are built on an FSB-driven corrupt business model, which is based on the structure of the security services and Russian state corporations and conglomerates, and is aimed at enriching the so-called elite and the upper echelons of today's Russia. It is based on, essentially releasing their own clans. In other words, those who are the most resilient and who win the struggle are the ones who are supposed to rise to the top. Because after Putin, there will definitely be a fierce struggle for his power, for the rule in Russia, and there will be a war that will ultimately reveal who will govern Russia in the future. This is something they are also very afraid of. And what does this mean for us? Well, it means they will have their own internal struggle, just like it was in the USSR and in many other places. Unless there isn't, it will still be a period of stagnation, like during the Brezhnev era, which will eventually lead to further processes that will bring about change. So in any case, this is obvious. And for us, For us, for Ukraine, this means that we might get a certain window of opportunity. This window of opportunity may not last very long, and we shouldn't expect that it will immediately lead to the collapse of Russia. We would like to believe that, but it may not turn out that way. And for us, this will mean that we will be able to do certain things that we are currently considering, and which, of course, should be part of our strategic state building and planning. This means the deoccupation of territories, the expulsion of Russian troops, the strengthening of the Ukrainian state, and integration into international alliances and blocs, while, let's say, there is discord in the Kremlin, and while our Western partners observing this will not object to Ukraine's integration and accession to these structures. This is what it could mean for us in practice. And that's why Volodymyr Zelensky is absolutely right. Putin will die. It's important for us to be patient and continue the fight. And as for the strategy, when people ask what is the strategy, and the strategy for the near future should be as follows, and it should sound like this: we have to outlast Putin, because after that we will have a window of opportunity, regardless of what kind of power struggle unfolds in Russia. And the bloodier this struggle is, the more discord and problems they have among themselves, the better it is for us, without a doubt. And precisely this needs to be understood in the context of what it means when we say that Putin will die. Putin will die, and we will live.